You're listening to the Wilmac Wire, the podcast that's designed to give you a glimpse into a growing SaaS company, specifically in the realm of customer interaction technology. From customer experience to data management, we'll talk about it here. Thank you for tuning in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Wilmac Wire. I will warn that today's episode is a little bit longer than our usual 20-minute episodes. You're going to be hearing from Steve McDonnell, our president and CEO. You might have heard of him before on this podcast. On October 23rd, he presented at Golisano Institute for Business and Entrepreneurship in their Speaking from Experience series, where every Wednesday they have leaders globally, nationally, locally, come in and present to students about their career journeys, the lessons they've learned, and how essentially they've gotten to where they are today. So, Golisano Institute, if you haven't heard of it before, it is a Rochester-based, non-traditional school institute that is a 2-year, very business-intensive program. It was created by Tom Golisano, who is well-known in the Rochester area and just an entrepreneur across the United States, investing in many businesses. And really the principle of the Golisano Institute is creating an environment for students to get real-life business experience if they want to build their own business, if they want to work in business, and go from there. So Steve presented to that group on October 23rd. So you'll be hearing from him today in his presentation. Before I pass it over to him, though, I want to thank the Golisano Institute team for their partnership and their open arms to Wilmac. We've loved working with you and look forward to growing with you. And that includes John Mordacey, Kathy Kayaza, Ian Mortimer, and Stephanie Belk-Ryan, among many others. Finally, if any of the Golisano students are tuning into our podcast, I wanted to give you a quick shout out and thank you for listening. Please know that we're always recruiting and we want to continue to build up the Rochester region and our offices in Toronto and Manhattan. So we have a lot of opportunities here for you at Wilmac Technologies. Again, thank you for tuning in, and I will now pass it over to Steve for his Speaking from Experience presentation. Thank you.
Before we kick things off, a couple of questions for you. How many of you have heard the term data is the new gold? Raise your hand. A couple of you? Okay, great. How many of you have ever had to call your bank, your credit card company, your phone company, and you get a menu? Press 1 for this, press 2 for that. Raise your hand. Like everybody, right? How many of you have gotten frustrated and said, customer service, just get me to somebody because the menu didn't really have what you were looking for, right? Everybody raises their hand. Okay. How many of you have gotten that message, okay, this is so-and-so, it's a call center that you're calling into, and this is so-and-so on the other end, and you're on a recorded line. Raise your hand. Everyone have heard that before? Okay. Do you think that information is actually being recorded? Yeah? Okay. What do you think the company is doing with that information? All right, let me ask you this. If you're a large financial institution, you may have hundreds and thousands of people calling your call center, right? And they're your customers telling you what their wants and needs are. Do you think that is really valuable data to have as a company? Right? Help you make your decisions? Okay, let me ask you this. Do you think AI can help distill all that information down for your company? Isn't that amazing? Okay. Well, enter Wilmac and Steve McDonnell. Steve is the CEO of Wilmac, and Wilmac is an international tech company headquartered right here in Rochester. They're in the 5-star building downtown, which is really, really cool space. And one of the services that they offer is helping companies manage all that data that is pouring into their call center. And you're going to learn more about that in just a minute. But before I bring Steve up, I want to point out a couple things. One, Wilmac is one of our corporate partners. So I want to give a special thank you and a shout out to the Wilmac team that's here today. So Ben Bowen, VP of Sales, thank you. Emily Miller, VP of Marketing, thank you. We have Joe, the controller, back here. Joe, awesome. Thank you for being today. And thank you for supporting the Institute. You have been one of the partners that we have relied on for a number of different things, and we really appreciate your involvement. So that's great. Okay, a little bit about our guest speaker. Steve cut his teeth in sales. He's been in sales for 15 years, selling to large companies and enterprises. He's also built a number of sales teams along the way. Today he's the CEO of Wilmac, and he will tell you a little bit about the company and his history with the company. Wilmac is an international tech company, and a couple things. Wilmac has reinvented itself over the last couple of years, and that's really important to know, especially in the tech world. They are also being recognized as a top 100 company here in Rochester. So the Rochester Chamber of Commerce does their top 100 awards every year, and Wilmac is on the list this year. So congratulations to Wilmac and for being recognized in the top 100. Okay. I think that pretty much wraps it up. I want to say thank you, Alex Kennedy, one of our students, did an internship at Wilmac last year. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for having Alex. If anyone is interested in doing an internship at Wilmac, you can certainly talk to Alex about it. You can talk to myself, Kathy, Stephanie. We'd be more than happy to chat more about that with you. And the Wilmac team will be available afterwards in the Village Bakery if you have any questions. So, with that said, I would like to introduce CEO of Wilmac, Steve McDonnell.
Hello. Thank you, John. That was a great deal. Great opening. Appreciate it. Wanted to say a quick thanks to Golisano Institute in general. As John mentioned, they've been a great partner for us, and it's been great for Rochester to have an institution like this here. I was here yesterday. It was quite the impressive presentation, and I know Dale started off by saying, don't think this is going to be crazy AI technology. I will start off by saying, definitely don't think ours is going to be eye-catching, popping technology. I thought yesterday was very impressive. You physically were able to see how AI worked. With what I'm going to present probably towards the end of the presentation today is how our AI works in contact centers and managing data. Again, that's all kind of back-end stuff, so it's probably not going to be quite as sexy as what you saw yesterday. But I did want to also mention Tom Golisano, obviously the founder here. I grew up in Fairport, New York before I left for years, and now I've came back. But one of my big motivations on a daily basis is trying to build a great company here in Rochester, New York. And a lot of that motivation comes from people like Tom growing up and seeing how great Paychex was. Everybody around the area worked for Paychex. You could see it on the national scene. So on a daily basis, that's a great motivation for me. And again, it's very impressive what you guys have going on here, and you guys should consider yourself lucky to have the opportunity. When I was growing up, and you'll see in the presentation, I went the very general path of high school, college, real world. So having this as an option, I think, is a phenomenal thing, and especially in Rochester, New York. So with that, a quick overview of Wilmac, and then I'll kind of dive into my personal history, how I wound up getting to this position, and what we're trying to do at Wilmac. So if we bring it back all the way, Wilmac was actually built in the late 1950s by my grandfather, who moved up here from New York City and started a company reselling dictating machines, which you guys might not even know. Some of the older folks in here would recognize that, but they are basically recording devices that lawyers and doctors would use. Instead of typing up their notes, they would talk into this machine, and then they'd give it to their secretaries, and they'd have to type it up. And that business was great for 20, 30 years. It was a very lifestyle business. Probably never got to more than 5 to 6 employees, but it really started our family's kind of entrepreneurial spirit. Fast forward to the 80s, my father and uncle ended up acquiring the company from my grandfather. That was in the late 80s. And pretty much a year or two later, they realized, oh man, this technology is going nowhere. what are we going to do? We just bought a company that is going downhill quickly. So they had to put on their entrepreneurial hats and basically start from scratch with being in debt to owing the money because they just bought the company. So a lot of hats off to them for growing this company. And back in the early 90s, a lot of computers were popping up. They were diving into different technologies, trying to figure out what fit. And commercial recording is what kind of caught on for them. And as John alluded to kind of at the beginning, back in those days, it was 911 centers and trading floors were really the people recording the phone calls. So a trading floor in Manhattan, think banks, buy, sell, Wall Street. So they caught on as a value-added reseller. So they didn't actually build the technology. A larger company, actually from Israel, built the technology, and they would resell it in upstate New York. They ended up doing very good for the first 3 to 5 years. The company from Israeli started growing. They started acquiring other companies in the area, and then would tap into Wilmac to get into those locations to help sell and support. That's how we ended up in Toronto in the late 80s. We do have an office up there still today, downtown Toronto, with employees in Toronto. And then 2 or 3 years later, went to New York City, did the same thing. So that is how we ended up with our office in Manhattan. We currently have our office across from Penn Station. I worked there for 10 years. Great spot. I'll dive into New York City a little bit, but the overview of Wilmac today is roughly we're a 10 million revenue company with around 40 employees spread out in those 3 locations. And we have about 300 to 350 customers globally. One of the things I do want to hit on, which is very disappointing and a hurdle we are fighting right now, is out of those 350 customers, I'm guessing 5 to 15 are located in Western New York. And we are headquartered right here in Western New York. So one of the things I'll speak about briefly here is the foundation that these companies need to utilize AI and how we are fighting the hurdles in Rochester to get these companies to get the basic foundations so they can eventually use AI. So that is one of the challenges we're facing right now in Rochester, New York, and we are motivated to do it because we are here and believe in Rochester. So that's kind of the high level Wilmac. So my journey, I'll take you through early life, first steps right out of college, making a move to Wilmac, dealing with some ups and downs, how I fought through that, and then coming back home and acquiring the company. So I'll kind of go through the early stuff a little quick, because I don't know how interesting it actually is. As I said, I went to Fairport, went to the University of Buffalo, ended up finishing at Geneseo, played sports throughout. I will be honest with you, my first couple of years out of college and into the real world, I learned more about business than I did at any of these institutions. Not saying that they weren't great institutions, but they did not dive into actual day-to-day business, which again, I give this place a lot of credit to for stepping up and giving that option to students, because the reality of the situation is it's not really out there. One of the things I look back and I take away from my experiences being growing up around here is athletics. So I played basketball all the way through to Geneseo, UB, and Geneseo and Fairport. And some of the lessons I learned playing sports, I still take today. And some of that is kind of the softer skills that you're gonna need if you wanna start a company, if you wanna run a company, if you wanna climb the corporate ladder, and that is really being mentally focused. And I'll tell a couple of quick stories here. All basically, I'll give credit to probably my first mentor in life when I look back, Scott Fitch, he's a basketball coach at Fairport, had taught me when I was younger. At those points, I didn't realize they were lessons that I would still carry on today, but now that I look back, I can see it. One of those would be teamwork. I happen to be a very competitive player, I would get on my teammates if I didn't think they were being held accountable, if they weren't living it up to the standards. And Coach Fitch would always tell me, there's a certain way to speak to people, there's a certain way to mentor people, there's a certain way to manage people. And you have to learn that to work with everybody. Everybody has a different style. Everybody looks at things differently, and the more you can step back and really understand where that person's coming from, the better off you're going to be. The second thing is persistence. In between my junior and senior year of high school, I was debating on playing in an AAU circuit, which is kind of a higher level outside of school basketball. And coach said, go play for a couple weeks and decide if you want to do it. It was going to be a big commitment through the spring and summer. It was the most intense and most competitive basketball I'd played with. I was used to being the best player on the court all the time, and I came back a little flustered. And he really drilled into me every time you step onto that court, you have to believe that you are the best player on the court. One of the things I've learned over the years in business is you always have to believe in what you're doing. If you set out to do something, you have to physically believe it and mentally believe it in your head. If you don't, how can you expect anybody else to follow you? How can you expect yourself to follow through with what you have to do? So the power of the mind is very important, and that's a lesson I learned back then. And then the law of attraction, which kind of goes similar to power of the mind, but being around people. You guys have a head start here. You're around similar-minded people, entrepreneurs. Be around the right people. Get into the right networks that will help you later in life quite a bit. So those are three lessons I kind of learned from Coach Fitch and when I was younger. And again, I think you guys are in a great spot here to be learning kind of the actual basics of business, where they're probably not taught in many institutions. So out of college, I knew a few things. I knew I wanted to make money, as I'm sure everybody does. I don't think that's there's no reason to hide that. As one of the presenters said yesterday, yes, you want to make sure you're doing good, but you want to be profitable. So there's no shame in saying you want to make a lot of money and you want to work for a company that's profitable. So I knew I wanted to do that. I thought, and I ended up figuring out, sales was definitely what I wanted to do. And the third thing was I didn't know anything about sales, and I needed a company that was going to train me. So ironically, I move up to Boston, and what do? Get a job with Xerox, a Rochester company. So it was, looking back, I didn't know really what I was getting into, and it was unbelievable for me. So the training right out of the gate, you get hired, you sit on what they call a bench. So back then, everybody's in the office, everyone's in a bullpen. So there's 20 sales reps, and you all come in the morning, and then you all go out to all your meetings, and you come back and talk about what happened during the day in the meetings, and you're there with your manager, and it's day-to-day coaching. So right off the bat, you don't get a territory at Xerox. You basically just have to sit in the bullpen and learn for a few weeks. Then they send you to this wild place called Leesburg, Virginia. It's like an RIT, I would say, size campus, just for people coming to Xerox. And you're just at a very intense, I guess, I wouldn't say MBA level, but up there. And every day you're 8 to 5, you're in classes, you're learning how to present, you're learning how to handle objections, which I still see today in sales reps. Our own sales reps struggle with handling objections. So if you ever dive into specifics of how to sell, I don't think I'm going to get into that today, but handling objections, huge. And they really trained you on how to sell. Not so much the product, but how to actually sell. Then you go back, I was in Boston at the time, and you have to interview for your territory. So even though you have a job at Xerox, went through all the interviewing, now you got to interview to get a territory to start trying to sell and make money. So I ended up getting lucky, getting a territory in downtown Boston, and that's when, my real life selling experience started. Back then, you'd have buildings, you'd go up and down the elevators, cold knocking. People don't like cold calling, try cold knocking. But it was a great experience for me. It was the first time I had a business mentor, not a mentor kind of outside the business world. She was my manager. She was phenomenal. She walked me through the first couple of years. You are super green trying to figure everything out, and you're putting yourself in front of people in some precarious situations and some heavy presentations and meetings. So to have someone there guiding me along was very important. I would say seek that out once you get out to whatever you're going to do, whether you're going to start your own business or work for someone or climb the corporate ladder. Seek out a mentor. That will pay dividends in the long run as well. And then this kind of, I'll dive into this at the end when I dive into the business of Wilmac and what we do day to day. But it's all about solving the customer problems. So whenever you're selling or you're thinking about building a business, you have to figure out, is it an actual problem or is it a problem that we perceive the customer might have? So whatever way you do it, you got to make sure to confirm that it's an actual serious problem that the customer is facing and you know how to solve it. We deal with that day to day with building our own IP and making sure we are getting our customers' feedback every day on what we are building. And I learned that early on, which was a great lesson. So that was up in Boston and Xerox. I was there probably at Xerox for, I think, 6 years. And so I was getting into my late 20s, and it was time, Xerox, big corporation. At some point, you're going to decide, are you going to start getting an MBA, going into management, or are you kind of going into the sales world, enterprise world? And then I had a third option. So at that time, my uncle, who ran the sales division at Wilmac, had been coming up to Boston trying to convince me to come work for Wilmac, which up to that point I was kind of hesitant at. I didn't know if I wanted to come back and work with the family company. My father and uncle owned it, so I didn't know what my path to owning the entire company would be. So I was still very hesitant. So at the same time, I had decided, all right, I don't think I'm going to go into the enterprise sales role, but getting an MBA and maybe going into management, that looks appealing. So those were the two careers I was kind of going back and forth with. I don't think there is, if anyone faces this, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think both careers are phenomenal, and it's what you make out of it. I would say I'd been coming off a couple really good years at Xerox, and I thought selling was a little easier than the reality of it. I also underestimated the name. So Xerox, what Xerox sells is actually named after Xerox. You can walk into any office in America and they know not only who Xerox is, but what they sell. That is a huge advantage and makes selling a whole hell of a lot easier. Nobody knows what Wilmac is. Even in Rochester, barely anyone knows what Wilmac is. And I underestimated that a bit when I was making the decision. And again, maybe I had a little bravado and arrogance going on back then, but decided to not only come work for Wilmac, but open up a Boston office. So a lot of responsibility right off the bat, and a lot of pressure right off the bat. So I'm leaving behind a very stable, great, secure job for some of the unknown and some of the pressure of working with a family. So did that, made that decision, going to the Wilmac office the next day. I'm leaving, the 35th floor of one of the nicest buildings in Boston, huge, awesome space, working with a ton of people, going out to happy hours, having a great time, to going to this dingy third floor law firm where we have a tiny one-person office in the back, and that is my new home. So the reality came quickly. I was in over my shoes. Cold calling, making hundreds of calls a day, trying to get into the network, not understanding really what we sell and what we're trying to do, and I'm there alone. We have Rochester, Toronto, New York. There's nobody in Boston. Looking back at that point, I still wasn't ready to do something like that. It was definitely good that I got the experience So some of the lessons I had learned earlier, it started coming back a little. Gotta have belief, gotta have persistence, just keep going, something will happen. So it was about a year and a half of doing that. And it was difficult. I wasn't hitting my numbers. The sales weren't coming. I wasn't growing. I wasn't getting the meetings that I needed to get. And our New York City rep had left, and I had kind of been covering for her. So I'd been going back and forth to New York, and even though we had customers and things were good in New York, something was missing, and I felt like we could really grow it. So I went and presented a business plan to go to New York and really focus on the financial compliance. So that's trading floors, selling into trading floors, big banks. At that time, I didn't really know anyone in New York. My whole life was in Boston, but I had been really kind of getting into books about law of attraction, about beliefs, and knew I needed to kind of throw myself into it. So I moved down to New York in 2013, I believe, or 2012, and kind of threw myself into it. And in New York, which again, if you're ever going to leave Rochester, don't recommend leaving Rochester, but if you are, New York is a great place to really cut your teeth. You get thrown right into it. You are working around the clock. Everybody works around the clock. Their social life is their work is their social life. And it really makes you learn, makes you grow. I would definitely recommend it. It was here that I really started looking into and building networks, being around people, as I spoke about earlier to you guys, being around more successful people than I am, learning from them, getting opportunities from them, seeing how they grow their business. It was also the time when I learned a lot about the financial side of the world we live in. So selling into, what we sold into was large trading floors. So think Bank of America, Wells Fargo, UBS. So you're getting exposed to bigger deals, you're getting exposed to kind of a cool scene. One of the big deals that I landed was UBS. For 2 years, a span of 2 years, every quarter I would go to London. So you're just that really catapulted what I wanted to do in life, and how I saw Wilmac. So that was a great experience. And again, it was around that time, being surrounded by these type of people, that I started thinking, all right, what could Wilmac be? And up to this point, we were still a value-added reseller. So we would resell that company in Israel, who now, at that point, is a $2 billion company. We would resell their software, the recording software that John was talking about, and then build managed services on it, support it. Our guys would implement it. But it still wasn't ours. So you'd still run into issues all the time. And what I knew I wanted to do at that point was build some sort of software. I just didn't know what. And I didn't know if it was going to be completely separate from Wilmac, or if it was going to be something with Wilmac. My dad and uncle were kind of not seeing eye to eye at that point, so I didn't know the direction of the company. But my mindset was, all right, I'm going to own a business in the next 5 to 10 years, whether it's Wilmac or another company, and I'm going to grow a software. I'm going to grow a software firm. Just didn't know what I wanted to build at that point. So for about a year or two, this has been going through my mind. I would talk to people. I would say it out loud to people. I would envision it. Going back to the law of attraction, this is the time where, really seeing it happen in action. And what happened was UBS and Bank of Canada, two of our larger customers, came to us the same week with the same request. The whole time I thought I was going to, wake up one night from a dream and be like, that's what I need to build. That thing is awesome. But the reality of it is, how it happened isn't nearly as sexy, but that's how these things happen. They came with the same request, diving into it. They had all this data kind of locked up. They had the voice data that John was talking about, and they wanted it, one, because the SEC wanted it, unfortunately, so they had to get it to the SEC. The other one wanted to do some cool things with it, wanted to build a customer journey and help their traders on trading better, see the flaws on these calls. But they couldn't get to this data and had no way of making sense of it all. So they came to us, actually, the original request was to go to our vendor in Israel and see if they would build it. Common thing in our industry. Our vendor said, absolutely not, we're not building it. So at that point, decided to take a risk, dive into it with building the product ourselves. So fast forward a few years, continuity really kind of blew up. No marketing, didn't have Emily back then. Just kind of referral, and we're getting Fortune 500 customers as our first customers. So my dad and uncle, nothing to do with me, decided that my dad would buy him out. So now kind of my vision that I had been thinking about was starting to kind of fall into place. And the time had come, pretty much during COVID, to come back home and acquire the company. M&A, even in family, can be tricky. I think it's something that, hopefully the Golisano Institute covers. But it's a very interesting world with that. We also had an owner, as I said, we have that office in Toronto, which is a separate entity. So I bought both of my dad and that guy out of all their shares to become full-time owner of Wilmac 100%. So me and my wife, who was pregnant with our first baby at the time, moved back to Rochester from Manhattan in 2021. And I know I'm kind of running over here on time. Good. So that's kind of the story and some of the soft stuff. I did want to give you guys kind of a run through on the actual business of Wilmac and kind of AI, and how that works. So right off the bat, when I acquired it, as I said, I'd been speaking with PE firms, venture capitalist firms in New York, knew kind of, all right, I know how they want a company like mine to be built. And I'm going to go in and build this thing, reverse engineer it 7 to 8 years, and figure out how to get the biggest buyout possible after 7 to 8 years. 6 months into owning the company, I realized, well, I don't want to do that. This is pretty sweet. I'm enjoying this. I like building. But I think we can get bigger than I thought. So, I think we can bootstrap this to 10, 15 million, and then maybe go to a growth equity who can infuse some capital into us, and we can grow this thing quicker to 100 million, and then maybe I'll start to think about selling it. Fast forward 6 months later, after the first year, I'm like, I have no interest in selling this anytime soon. I'm thoroughly enjoying building a company. I enjoy the people, I enjoy the culture. And that was the biggest shift right off the bat with Wilmac. We were a lifestyle company for 55 years, and I needed to shift it to more of a growth company. So culture was key for us. We were in a dingy building downtown. It was fine for what we were doing, but we needed a place where people wanted to come to work and were excited and wanted to collaborate. So we moved to the 5-star building. That's been great. We got to build it out ourselves. And then the other big thing is people. What I found out quickly in business, especially at our size, is people are basically everything. It moves the needle one way or the other way very quickly. So right off the bat, I knew my weaknesses in business overall, running a company, would be finance and operations. Went out and I knew we had to kind of get some better people in there to assist me. So went over through Rochester networks and was able to recruit someone from PwC, Joe, the controller, sitting back there. And he's been great. He's came in, he's built out his own team. If you ever are going to sell for smaller companies or try to build a company, know your P&L inside and out, and have someone that's very strong there supporting you. So after we did that, I brought in an operations manager. We have our back end from Windstream right off the bat, and then I got lucky with Emily, who was right out of college and has been an all-star for us. So that happened all pretty quickly, and we were able to start the wheels shifting We made some sales changes, kind of the world I come from. I'm trying to step out now and be CEO and have salespeople be driven by the sales VP. I would say, no matter what you're doing, if you're running a business, you got to have some hands in sales. You have to know how to sell. You have to be a part of it. But as far as delegation, brought Ben in, who's here today, who leads our sales efforts. So it's been a great year, great 2 years. We grew 40% first year, and we'll grow 25% this year. But we are set up to have our annual ARR, annual recognized revenue, to be what our revenue is this year. So we should grow 50 to 75% next year. So that is our big gap year, I would say. So we are pretty excited for that. Talking about AI, getting into that world, ARR versus and SaaS. I don't know how deep you guys have gotten into that type of verbiage, but it's the pricing models that any AI company, any cloud company, those are the pricing models that everything is shifted to today. So it's not a one-time sale and then a maintenance fee. It's a subscription fee going over and over. So what you want to do is build that up. So you lock them into 3 to 5 years. So each year you're building a bigger base and starting at a bigger number. Very important if you're in kind of this SaaS world. And if you take it down a layer, the actual technology, AI is pretty much, I would say, and this is an opinion, not fact-based, 98% of the companies out there will need to be cloud infrastructure to take advantage of AI. I think the very top, largest companies in the world have enough money to possibly do it on on-prem servers, but the commercials behind it are just too hard for 98%. So most of the infrastructure is going to shift over to cloud. And when I talk cloud, you're talking Amazon, Microsoft Azure, Google, and Oracle. So those are the four. When anyone talks cloud, those are the four main players. No one really has their own cloud. Everyone's just an instance of one of those. So we use AWS, and that has been good for us. So how we are using AI today, quickly, 2 different ways. I'll talk about the stuff we resell and the stuff we build. The company we resell is NICE. They have actually had their analyst kickoff this week in Africa, and they are very far ahead of the game in AI. So it's called conversational AI. You might get it if you call a Bank of America or Goldman Sachs. It's basically you call your contact center and you think you're talking to a human, but you're talking to a robot. Now, most people are used to calling the contact center and you're talking to what sounds like a robot, correct? Press 1, press 2. You can tell it's not a human. Now you will be actually talking to a robot that sounds like a human. And the goal is, and the reality of it is where we are today, if they could take care of 20, 30% of the calls, that saves them a ton of money. So it's not there to be 100% complete, but it's there to get 30%. So that is kind of where AI is with what we resell. AI with what we're building. The truth of the matter is we look at other AI companies that focus very forward thinking on AI, building it, and then most companies at our size are going to private label that and put it into our product. So what we do is we have all of these data that I've been talking about, and we'll build AI into it to talk about a customer journey. So if you ordered a couch from Pottery Barn and you quickly chatted, didn't get anywhere, you're mad, then you pick up a phone call, you have an argument with the phone, then you email, and 2 days later you have to do it all over again. It's collecting that entire journey. The AI collects the entire journey and kind of can give the management an idea of what goes on those calls, and then the better plan and better support their agents. So that's kind of where we are with AI. Yesterday was some of the most impressive stuff I've seen besides the news in real world applications. It's just coming out, and it's just really, I think it'll be in the next 3 to 5 years. And again, unfortunately, a lot of companies out there right now aren't prepared, don't have the foundation to even move to AI. They got to get their cloud infrastructure going first. So that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'll wrap it up quickly. Sorry, John, for going over. I think if you're going to do anything, all the strategy and business decisions, super important, and you need to know it, but you're not going to get anywhere without any of this. You have to be persistent. You can't limit yourself. If you think you can build a $15 million company, why can't you build a $50 million company? Keep going one step further. And then be around great people. Think about what you want to do. The more you think, the more it should happen. And with that, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. So, when you think of business in Rochester, we often tend to think about the companies like Xerox, which you talked about, and Kodak that was just here a couple weeks ago, even Paychex, Bosch and Long, right? Wilmac is the company of the future for Rochester. So take advantage of Steve and his team being here today and pick his brain. He's doing it. He's living it right now. And I think you can learn a ton from him. So thank you for being here and sharing your story. I got a lot of questions for you, but I want to make sure that our students have time to ask you questions as well. With the focus on AI here at the Institute this week, let me ask you this. Let's start with AI. Where are we in AI? Some people will refer to it as a baseball game. We're in the early innings. Some people will say we're still in warm-ups. We haven't even started a game yet. What's your perception of AI and where things are going?
So yesterday, I thought were some great presentations. I think that all the new ChatGPT, that is unbelievable. Now it's taking that from the consumer to a business. I think some of what businesses will be able to do is still 3 to 5 years away. I think we're still at the infant stages. I mean, the truth of the matter is when we talk to our customers, and we have customers that are in the Fortune 500, they just don't know. A lot of them don't understand AI, don't know where it's coming from, don't know how they can make an actual business, a use case out of it. All they see it as basically an assistant. He talked about the avatar yesterday. One of the big AIs for what we sell is a chatbot, basically helping out the agent. So as the agent's talking to you on the phone, he has a chatbot speaking to him to suggest things to say to you guys. So it's things like that. Some of the more advanced and where this is going to go, I still think probably 5 to 10 years.
Do you picture a contact center with no human beings in it? It's either robots or just all voice automated.
Yeah, it's tough because you don't want to scare people to say, they're gonna take everyone's jobs. The contact center in general is a place that has a lot of turnover. The skill set might not be as difficult as some other jobs. So I don't want to say all contact center agents, but definitely more low-level basic stuff. It will definitely take over.
Yeah, it's wild. I think it'll impact Rochester quite a bit in a lot of different ways. And I think in many ways it'll be helpful for kind of an economic boom, if you will, over the next couple of years.
Yeah. One of the interesting things when you talk about that, you think contact center, and you think of people working contact centers, but you have to look at a trading floor. Those are very educated, highly intense people making a ton of money. And I do think that AI will take away a lot of those jobs.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about sales, and Tom Golisano, our founder, has often said sales. Nothing happens until the sales rep makes that sale, right? Closes the deal. So let's talk a little bit about your journey in sales. You had mentioned at one point when you had moved over to Wilmac, you were struggling to make numbers, and there's quotas and getting appointments. Talk a little bit about this. Some of our students probably haven't had that experience yet, but that's pretty common if you get into the sales field. How'd you manage that?
Yeah, I think anyone going into sales, it's good to get your first at least 5 years. You're cold calling a couple hours a day. You're learning that skill set is very important. When you end up selling to large enterprise, you still need that skill set. I think rejection is very common in sales. You are going to call 100 people, and maybe 2 people will take a meeting. So I think going into it, you have to understand that, and you have to be resilient. You have to be ready to keep going. You know, your competitor is going to put down the phone after he gets discouraged after 20. You go for that 20 more, and it might be that whale that's going to, you know, hit your numbers. So I would say, as difficult as it is to do with anything, you just have to be persistent. You have to keep going.
And it gets better.
It definitely gets better, yes.
So fast forward, you end up interacting with a number of Fortune 500 companies as your customers, and you're now selling to them. How did that kind of defeat early on in sales help you dealing with Fortune 500 companies and having the confidence to close those deals?
Yeah, one of the big things with Fortune 500 companies is the sales cycle takes forever. So when you're in the sales cycle, you're handling, it might not be rejection, oh, I don't want to talk to you, see you later, but you're handling different types of rejection. Oh, it's got to go through legal. Oh, legal wants this. Oh, operations wants this. You're handling objections constantly. So it's a different sort of rejection, but you still, in sales, there's people, and it's very common, we see it, we have to coach our sales reps not to do it. They get a rejection or an objection after they've been halfway through the sales cycle and they're ready to skedaddle. It's like, no, get back in the seat and handle that objection correctly, and let's move on. So even with the Fortune 500 companies, it's a different type of sale, but you learn that you have to be persistent. It's really similar in all facets.
Talk a little bit about the subscription series that you kind of have built up, because that's another thing that Mr. Golisano was talking about, that reoccurring revenue and establishing a company that does that. So no matter what industry you're in, how important is that subscription series?
It's very important. I mean, it helps you sleep at night. If you are looking at valuation type stuff, your multiples on SaaS and subscription are quite a bit higher than your typical perpetual. So for 20, 30 years, the way you sold software was a perpetual model. You would sell, 100 license for a set cost, a big one-time bang, and then you'd get some money for your implementation, project management, and then you'd get maybe 20% of that total for an annual maintenance. And it wasn't, they could switch it out any year. Over the years, Microsoft and Amazon kind of led with this, the subscription model. So right off the bat, you're taking away three different line items and putting it into one, and automatically you're getting it every year. So from a financial point of view, the way you look at it, that's coming in. You can forecast better, you can build on it. So a company that might have the $15 million of perpetual model would get valued at a multiple of EBITDA. So EBITDA is everything after you take costs and everything. So that $15 million might be $3 million at the end. And you might only get a 4 times multiple. So your company's worth $12 million. You take a $7 million SaaS model or subscription model, you're getting that 7 multiplied on revenue, and then on top of it, the multipliers are higher. So even though you look at the company, a $15 million and a $7 million company, that $7 million company might be worth twice as much because of that. So I'd say it's good from building a company, and it's good from a valuation outside perspective.
Okay. And so one of the things that you just mentioned to or alluded to is kind of knowing your numbers. And Tom is a big thing. You got to know your numbers. So you kind of transition from being the salesperson and that having that expertise now to looking at the financial statements and making decisions. Can you talk a little bit about how important that is?
Yeah, I got thrown into it. Again, I had a good hire with Joe Brienzi as our controller coming from PwC. You learn it pretty quick, and we can kind of figure out, all right, this is happening now. That means this is going to happen in 3 months. You also, after working together, you're picking out the metrics. So what are the most important metrics that if I was off on an island somewhere, not paying any attention to Wilmac, and Joe or my leadership team was giving me these metrics to make sure I could understand if Wilmac was running correctly, have those metrics and look at them every week to make sure they're correct. And if you have a few weeks where they're getting sideways, something's wrong. So very important. We look at, I sit down with him for an hour twice a week to review our numbers. I look at the numbers on a daily basis. So if you're going to run a company, the selling is fun and great, and you need the revenue, but looking at the hard numbers is very important.
important. So, in terms of mentorship, who have been some of your mentors maybe along the way? And how important has that been to you in your kind of development into a leadership role?
Yeah, definitely. So early on, I had Scott Fitch, and he's still today. I go out to lunch with him once a month since I moved back. He is a mentor, not that he's in this business or in real business. He's a basketball coach and has some business experience, but more personal. You know, I talked about law of attraction, believing in yourself, visualizing things. He has been great for that. Kind of takes it from an athlete's point of view. So that he's been great. I mentioned the woman up in Xerox. She's actually a Rochester girl, ironically, Nicole Steenberg. She was wonderful probably from all of my 20s in guiding me on really how to sell properly, how to be a professional. That was great. In my 30s, I had a few different ones in the city. As I said, one of our vendor that we resell, Nice, one of their executives really helped me out along the way, sat me down, kind of understanding how business works. So my uncle and father obviously have been mentors kind of in a different way, but they know the business inside and out. So I still, my dad wanted a clean break, and I think for us, we needed a clean break with the changes we were trying to make. And the new hires and some of the difficult decisions that I had to make that first year on who was going to fit our culture, who was not. So he doesn't come to the office, but I do meet with him for lunch, every other month.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, we've had a number of our guests that speak on Wednesdays talk about mentorship and the importance of that, especially early on, finding that person that kind of guides you along.
Yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention is one of my big goals this year is building an advisory board, and that kind of goes along with mentorship. We're not big enough that we need to get a full-blown board, paid for board. But what I'm looking at as we gap this from 10 to 20 million this year is 2 or 3 what I would consider mentors in the area and build this board with them. So that is something that I'm looking at, and that goes right along with mentorship.
Sure. Yeah. So we've had a number of family businesses here throughout the past year, and it can be tricky, as you alluded to earlier, which is understandable. But now that you're CEO, can you talk maybe a little bit about leadership and maybe your style and kind of how you like to lead?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I'm trying to, I wouldn't say I can be very direct with people, but in certain occasions I will be very direct. And what I am learning is the most important part of Wilmac is not any of this AI stuff, it's not any of our sales strategy, it's the people. As I said, it moves the needle quick. And I know in your seats it's tough to believe, and it might sound like jargon. If you asked me 10 years ago, I'd be like, come on, is that real? But it is very real. So mentoring my leadership team is extremely important. Trying to give them the resources that they need to execute, trying to stay out of their way. I come from the sales world. I like to get into the sales. Trying to stay out of that is difficult. But right now, I would say my method is really to try to delegate and lead the leadership team so we can scale.
Right. So
Put hands on. My door's always open. Anyone can walk in.
it's that age-old motto, it's working on the business, not in the business.
Correct.
So I do want to open up to questions. So last question for me, what advice would you throw out to our students that are, just getting started, thinking about a career in business or entrepreneurship? Any advice?
I'd say get your hands dirty. Get out there. Meet as many people as you can. You have great resources here. I know it's tough to go up to somebody and ask for 15 minutes to have a coffee, but go out and meet as many people as possible. Get exposed to things. If you're going to get a job, jump in. Be the person you're going to work extra hard. You're going to ask your boss, what extra can I do today? Be that person and just go the extra step. I think it goes a long way. And the more educated you get, better. And I'm understanding all industries. One of the things that I think is cool about what you guys are doing here that I really didn't get exposed to. I mean, Fairport is a good education. I didn't get exposed there. Didn't really get exposed at Geneseo is the world of finance that I was exposed to in Manhattan. And that really runs a lot of our world and what you can and can't do, and people not being comfortable and thinking of it as something because you're not educated by it. But if you dive in, you realize half the words they're talking about, are just words to scare people away. So I would say get educated in as many industries as possible.
There was a part B to that question, so apologies. But you had talked about going to New York and Boston, right? Did you ever think that you would come back to Rochester? When you left Rochester, were you like, okay, I'm out, I'm done? Or did you see yourself back here at some point?
Yes, so it's, when I left, I graduated college in 06. So I was leaving in 06. And there was a push from family, from people around, like, you gotta get out, you gotta get out. Rochester wasn't booming technology-wise. You really had paychecks and pay tech back then. And it was like, you gotta move out. So when I didn't really have a plan when I moved to Boston. I would say in the middle of New York City I was like, I don't think I'm leaving this place. There's no reason to go back to Rochester. So it wasn't until some of the issues with my dad and uncle where I started to kind of have some vision. At the same time, I was getting married to someone from Long Island, so I didn't know how that was going to work. How would I bring her up here? Quite a different lifestyle, her whole adult life in Manhattan, and now coming up here. So it wasn't until probably like 2019, 2020 when I was like started to kind of envision, all right, what would it be to come back here? And I had some buddies who had moved out to Chicago and other cities that had started coming back. Yeah. So I could kind of see what they were doing. Rochester is a great spot to live. It's a great spot to raise a family. It doesn't have, it's not as hard as a New York City, where going grocery shopping can be a pain in the butt. Doing anything can be a pain in the butt. Yes, you're around all the action, but everything is very difficult. Rochester is a great lifestyle place that I think we do have to, and I think you guys are doing a good job, pump some juice into it, make it a little bit more progressive and innovative, and get some of these companies moving. But it is a great foundation. It's a great place to live.
Yeah, and that's Tom's dream, to produce future entrepreneurs, future Steve McDonnell's, future Tom Golisano's that get back to the community. So that's good to know. Great. All right, let's open it up to questions.
Hi Steve, I'm James, and I really like that part you mentioned about how people get tripped up or they get derailed when sales calls or talking with Fortune 500 companies. So could you tell me a little bit about how you would walk somebody through when they are ready to throw in the towel, and how do you help them reframe when they're faced with this adversity?
Yeah, I think so. If it's on a cold call, it's going to be pretty tough to do. I think that's just training them over and over and over. But I think your question is more around the Fortune 500 sales cycle. So, Ben Bowenson back there, he does this day in, day out, where we have a sales rep have a discouraging call, let's say, and it was going smoothly, it's a big deal, so they get even more excited, and you might have a discouraging call. I think at that point, you sit down and walk through what happened on the call and try to coach them on, all right, you could have handled this differently, you could have handled this differently. Let's set up a call, or what's the next step to get back into the game. One of the big things for us is, you want to stay in the game. And if it is a significant rejection or objection and you have to move on, then you have to be okay pulling back and moving on. Some of these companies will string you along for a long time, and big deal, so you're going to get emotionally attached to it. So you have to be able to pull back, and that comes from the help of your management to know when to pull back or when to push forward. But it's very fluid and difficult to do, I would say, and it's very nuanced.
Good morning. I'm Christina. And my question to you is, I see where Wilmac's going in the next 10, 15 years, but do you have any other endeavors in life that you would like to try out, because the world has changed so much?
That's a great question. Business-wise or personal?
Both.
So from a business perspective, I think our product continuity is at its infant stages. So we sit in these strategic meetings every other week with our our CTO and some of our development leaders, and then some of the frontline sales guys. And the meeting is dedicated to not what are we developing in the next 6 to 12 months? What kind of ideas are we looking at 3 to 5 years? Where can we take this? So for us, I think AI is going to be where we're going to go. How that plays out, we have a couple different scenarios. Surveillance for the financial world, putting AI around surveillance. So you don't have trading floors, you don't have investment banks doing shady things constantly, and really being around that. And then the other area would be contact centers. How can we build it, as John alluded to, and everyone laughed right at the beginning, pain in the butt to call. Everyone's had horror stories. And even with all the great technology that's out there today, they still kind of stink. So can we get AI to really help that out? So those are the two areas right now that we're looking into. But because we try to be agile and flexible, it could move quickly. Personally, my wife's having our third girl, all under 3 in the next month. So
All right, congratulations.
Thank you. I think I'm going to be a little crazy for the next 10 to 15 years. But if you want, and talking about high goals, I don't think I'll ever have the time to do it. But I'd love to play enough golf to be a scratch handicap.
Join the club.
Yeah.
Good question.
Hello, Steve. Thank you for coming in today. My name is Brendan. I was just curious. So when you have that subscription-based pricing model, how do you determine the value to set the pricing? Not only that's best for your business, but also for the customers.
If I knew the answer to that, we'd have a lot more revenue. Honestly, it's trial and error. We've sat, our controllers from PwC. We've sat down with Microsoft product people. We've sat down with a lot of CFOs that have done startups and sold them, Fortune 500 companies. And it's trial and error. And our sales team getting out there, seeing where that peak is. And if from a sales perspective and an owner perspective, if the customers aren't saying no and pushing back enough, you're not high enough. So you have to push up a little. It's a little cutthroat, but that's the reality of the situation. You're building this product, and you don't want to be undervaluing your product by giving it away. So it is really talking to the frontline sales reps, getting their advice. Most of them right off the bat are going to push back. Oh, this is too high. Can't believe we're raising prices. The customers, they don't want to have the conversation. And they have the conversation, everything goes smooth, and it's like, all right, next one we can push up a little bit more. So it's a very, very difficult process. That's why large companies have hundreds of people dedicated to it, but that's kind of our process on it right now.
Hi, Steve. It's Ian. How's it going?
Good, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you very, very much for you and your company's outward support of this institute. All of the nice comments you give us on LinkedIn, and obviously working with John on this partnership. Very, very unique. And let's get a round of applause for Steve for all he's doing for us. I do have a question. So some of our students are getting involved in consulting projects where we're working with organizations on technology adoption and specifically AI adoption. If you were to describe the skill set and behaviors of kind of an ideal consultant that you would want to work with on a project like this, can you describe that person?
So we have a love-hate relationship with consultants, if I'm being brutally honest. I want someone who we know we can trust 100%. I think that is the most important thing. Someone who will dive into it, however, whatever time period you set. And I think it's very important to set the expectations up front in any consulting gig that you're going to get or anything you're going to do. Set the expectations. Make sure the customer knows the expectations so he's not let down, or vice versa. So set the expectations, and then I would say it's not as technical as it is soft skills. I want someone driven who's going to work there, who when we have questions is going to respond quickly and be held accountable. Not someone who's going to email 2 days later with a couple questions. In the business world, it works fast, and if you sit on an email for too long, next thing you know, you have questions back and forth, and it's been 2 weeks. So in a consulting gig, I think accountability is very, very important. So that's what I would say is the number one thing that we look for to make sure our accountants are being held accountable with what they're going to deliver. Because we've had good and bad consulting engagements, but I would say accountability. Make sure you're there, make sure you're responding, make sure you're there, you're available is the most important thing.
Hi, I'm Yang. Thank you so much for coming today. My question is, how do you guys approach talent development and hiring at Wilmac?
Great question. We are in the process of building out a more formal process. When you look at, I would say it's different for each department. I'll pick out sales. A lot of the sales team, because of my experience, has been guys I've worked with in the past. You know, we've brought 2 guys that I used to work with in the UK over to our Canada office. I've known people in the business and I've recruited them as our sales team. That's worked out so-so. What we're trying to do is build younger people, bring in younger sales reps, train them to be inside sales reps, and really sit down in our office. So when we bring in new sales reps now, we want them in 5 days a week. We want them getting hands-on with our sales VP, our sales engineers, learning and training to the point they can be an outside or enterprise sales rep and getting them out. Our dev team has a little different process. They normally want to recruit out of co-ops. So they've had a lot of luck with RIT co-ops coming in and then choosing the best ones to come work for us. We do a decent amount of jobs, or a decent amount of work with the local colleges in here trying to recruit talent. As I put an emphasis on, I think people is the most important thing. So we're always looking for talent. I would say any conversation I'm having socially, on the weekends, I'm meeting someone, I'm always thinking, is this someone that could work for Wilmac? Is this someone who could help Wilmac out? I would say we're at our size, roughly 40 people. We're just getting to the point where we're really starting to document and put training processes into place. But what we want is people who will grow with this company. The leaders that I have now, when we get to 25, 30 million, will hopefully be the C-suite. Everybody will start moving up and building out more teams. So I think we do have a very attractive story to tell as we're growing quick, and that's something that will only get better. Does that answer your question?
Jim?
Hello, Mr. Hello, Mr. McDonnell. Thank you for coming out today. My name's Max, and I was curious as to how you are handling, or how you handled rather, developing or creating that development team. Did you go for outsourcing, or what was your kind of positioning on that?
Great question. Wild story. So in 2017, when they came, when UBS and Bank of Canada came to us and we decided to do it, one of the good things I would say about working for a family company is that your dad's the boss. And I had some autonomy. So I kind of went off script. We outsourced it directly. So we do have a team of all these engineers, even back then, that were doing implementations of software. But only a few of them were good at coding or programming. So with their help, we picked an outsourcing in Connecticut, who built it awful. I mean, this thing for 3 years was not a good looking piece of technology, and we were selling it to Fortune 500 companies. It was crazy. But that goes back to we were solving a problem. So no matter what it looks like, if you're solving a problem, they need it. When I started moving back and we started picking up a lot of traction, I went through a pretty large recruiting process to bring in our CTO with a recruiting firm in Rochester. Probably interviewed 40 to 50 people. Settled on Bob, and I have relied on Bob to build it out internally. So now he has brought that product is basically scrapped, the one that the outsourcing company built, and Bob has built our cloud version of the product with the dev team, and he does all the hiring, co-opting stuff for that. So, kind of crazy start, but we're in a great spot now.
Yeah, we're in a good spot. So speaking of being in a good spot, as everyone here knows, Mr. Golisano loves business, and he especially loves entrepreneurship. And I think one of the reasons he does is that from my observations, the situation that you and Wilmac are in. So the way I see it, there's 3 different kind of paths, right, that you could go down. So you can continue running Wilmac the way you want to, just like it is, privately held company, and life is great. You could have a buyer knock on your door and offer you a whole bunch of money to buy Wilmac, and that could be a really cool opportunity for you and your team. Or you can maybe go public someday, right? And that changes the complexity of everything. But the choice is yours. And I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. So anyone that's thinking about running your own business and entrepreneurship, you want to be in the situation that Steve and his team and Wilmac are in moving forward. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I think having the options is great. I think we are right now really committed to building out a great private company in Rochester. I do think times have changed even over the past 2 or 3 years. That even though we're a small kind of startup, you want to be profitable. So make sure you're profitable. That makes you have these options. If you're not profitable, or if you took capital from a PE or VC, your options are a little less, and you have to make some harder decisions. So that is one thing we've been lucky that our kind of legacy business, all the stuff we resell, can easily fund any of our own development work. And that good for you basically gives us the option. Yep.
This is awesome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wilmac Wire. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or visiting our website at www.wilmactech.com. You can also watch the full video recordings of every episode on our YouTube channel. Thank you for being a part of our community, and again, thank you for listening to the Wilmac Wire.